Awesome. Thank you, everybody. And thanks for joining. It's a little bit dark here, as you can probably tell, because it's a little bit early in the morning, but good to see you all. Obviously, I know pretty much all of you. So always nice to kind of reconnect and hang out, right? So when the guys from Reed kind of reached out about AIX, and they were talking about carbon neutral goals and zero carbon for the future for cabin interiors. It's something that we've been talking about a lot in the last 12 months. It's a topic of conversation that seems to come up every other week, more or less. Seems to be a very sort of current thing to talk about. At one of the recent events that we had over at Airbus, we had a very nice presentation about the zero carbon goals for the future, which is kind of interesting when you think about cabin interiors in particular. What role can we play in terms of a zero carbon future? Chris, what do you think as a kind of industry veteran, right? What do you think our role can be in terms of cabin interiors to a zero carbon future? Because obviously we talk about, when we think about zero carbon, we think mainly about, jet engines burning huge quantities of fuel and stuff. How does that kind of flow down into an interior, do you think? Can we play a role in it?
Well, I think we have to play a role. I think we have to play a role as citizens of the planet, much less of the industry. And all businesses, all people are going to have to make lots and lots and lots and lots of small changes. I think the thing that I believe about what we're going to do, what we are doing, what we have to continue to do, is to make lots of small changes. We're not looking for some magic wand or one great big banner waving initiative. It's about just chipping away at the thing everywhere. And for me, and it was what I've the reason I wanted to be here to talk about it is I think it's a leadership issue. It's not a technology issue. There are lots of technologies that are going to be deployed, but we need to create demand for them, and we need to create a burning platform as leaders to make sure that the people who work around us are making changes in the right direction. And then that means giving them information. So we traditionally run businesses on pounds, shillings, and pence, or dollars and cents. And that was the ultimate measure. And the higher up the organization you got, the more you spoke in pounds, shillings, and pence, dollars. And we've got to change that. We've got to add another currency to profitability, which is climate impact, carbon dioxide equivalent. And I'm sort of reaching for what the right word is, because that I think is one of the central problems, is that as a society, and certainly as an industry, and as managers, we've got to work out how we're going to measure what good looks like.
How we don't have a barometer to measure things against just yet, it would seem. We
certainly common currency. The great thing about the dollars is it's a common currency. Pretty much everybody, and it's only everyone in business, and most people around the world know what a dollar's worth. But few of us have any sense of how many kilos of carbon dioxide emissions or equivalent we produce by making a cup of coffee, flying to LA. I'm not sure I know. I guess I know one's larger than the other, right? But I don't know by how many times. But I know the price of a cup of coffee. I can guess the price of a ticket. I know that's in the common discourse, isn't it? And we've got to change that.
It's hard to range find, isn't it, to know what is. I don't think if you ask Gen Pop, what's the difference between you flying on an A350 versus an old junker like a 717? They don't know, right? They have no idea. So that's interesting. So Nico, following on that, right? Being a materials person, sort of kind of the same question, but kind of rephrased. Obviously, when we talk about materials, and in particularly bovine materials from leather and the kind of their side business of the meat industry being as known polluters of the environment, do you think that's a veritable cause that that you guys can move the needle with in and contribute in that sense in terms of the sustainable kind of future?
Yeah, I think we can, and I think I want to pick up on a few points Chris is making as well. I think within the aviation world, what I see, I think part of how we can move the needle is learning from other industries as well. And I think if you obviously we work in a number of industries. If you go, for instance, to the consumer arena, you see a lot of metrics being put in place, trying to get measurements in place to look at the true impact of products from cradle to cradle, life cycle analysis according to international standards and things like that. And I think that's a starting point of starting to dissect what one material versus the other will contribute to carbon emissions. And I think some of that, bringing that into this world as well, I think is quite important. I think the second part of it, and you've alluded to the bovine material and the leather industry, is we need to strive to solutions also in the future which will reduce the amount of waste we're generating. And when we generate any waste, we need to find solutions how to reuse that. The planet has produced enough natural resource of raw materials in the past, and we should be learning how to use what's around us and reusing that in solutions and trying to maintain the economical value as much as we can.
Gotcha. Really interesting. So, I mean, Ben, obviously being a thin plastics kind of guy, plastics are always kind of top of the agenda, really. People always think about sustainability, think, oh, plastics are terrible.
Plastics are bad. And when they can actually be quite sustainable. No, I really appreciate both what Chris and Nico said, because there's so much there to unpack. And I think this industry signed up for net zero, not exactly knowing what it was. And I do think it's achievable, and I think we all have to play a part in it. I think we know that we all have to play a part in it. What my fear is that we, as Chris said, it's everywhere. It's incremental. It's not going to be through just recycled plastics or just leather. It's how they're made. It's down to the manufacturing process. It's how they're shipped. And what I get worried about is the industry is so hung up on this massive net zero target that we're not making those little incremental steps that we need to make, right? And if I heard, one is awareness is where we need to be in education, right? So we know what net zero means. But two is the next step is looking in the mirror and measuring yourself, right? Well, if we don't have a universal unit of measurement, then we are kind of all measuring with a different ruler, if you will. So I think we, as an industry, have to get aligned on the basic blocking and tackling and fundamentals before we can reach for something like net zero. And every single one of us play a part in it, whether that's providing products that are recycled, sustainable, or the way that manufacturing process of your product is. I think everybody has a responsibility to own their space and provide those resources up to your suppliers, because we all have a scope 1, 2, and 3. So we all are connected.
For sure. You touched on a really interesting point there that I think would be interesting to get Sahab's view on. You talked about recycling and upcycling. And what kind of role do you think things like MRO and maintenance repair and end of life cycle single use, how relevant do you think that is to have in the aircraft interiors industry specifically?
Sorry. So I was just going to say, yeah, it's quite relevant. I mean, we've been working with quite a few retrofit projects where we're doing seat cover changes, and every single operator is asking, what are we doing towards the end of the life cycle of the product? What happens with the seat covers? And unfortunately, you know, once the seat covers are made with the lamination foam and adhesives, 90% of the time they do end up in landfill. But there are some repurposing programs like which Southwest Airlines are doing, where they're converting leather seat covers into bags, school bags for certain communities with the fabric seat covers. There are a few companies that can use the fabric seat covers, convert them into yarns, and those yarns can be used to manufacture carpets and underlay. So every operator we're working with right now, they have the same question: what do we do towards the end of the life of the seat covers? And so we have some solutions we're providing, which is a repurposing programs and recyclability, where if it becomes really expensive. We have explained to airlines where when you start separating the seat covers, it's very difficult to do so once it's made into a seat cover. So these are the things we're openly discussing with airlines and providing solutions. So right now, the most a logical solution is a repurposing program. If the covers are in good condition, they can be repurposed into different type of items. And then the issue comes, who pays for that? Do airlines remove all the covers from, I don't know, let's say 100 aircraft, send it to a facility where there's a team working on them, sorting out the covers and manufacturing into these bags, for example?
Right. So if we think about that as a completely circular kind of economy for aircraft interiors, and I think I'm really interested to get all of your viewpoints on this. Does that mean that we then have to compromise to ensure that we're designing the product for an end of life? So do we have to bring in kind of new design elements or new design criteria? So Chris, like when you're designing a seat, do you need to think about, right, well, if I use this material, that can be upcycled at a later date, or we could chop this off, turn it into a coffee table at the end of its life, or something like those kind of things? Does that become now more relevant from a design perspective going into the product in the first place?
Well, yes, I think 100%. I don't think it's compromise. I mean, you say, do we have to compromise? I think there's I don't hold and I don't agree with the mindset that says green is worse or somehow less luxurious or somehow it's going to diminish the passenger experience. I think, to design is to choose. So when you design something, you choose, you make a series of choices, and you make those choices based around the requirements and your constraints. And you just need to add a new constraint in, which is how much carbon's involved in this and what's the end of life story for it. And then you come up with really clever new solutions. Like, no, I don't think we should allow, and we should really challenge the viewpoint that says this transformation is going to be at the cost of some human experience side of it. It's not. It's actually, for the engineers working with me, they're having great fun because it's introduced a new constraint, and that's a new interesting thing, new interesting problem to fold into your problems to come up with your solution. So there's some straightforward rules of thumb. And Sarah picked up there about when a cover's been laminated, you can't recycle it. And what he's getting at there is you've permanently bonded by glued together dissimilar materials. And when you get down to recycling, you want to get down to the raw material, not materials. So choosing not to laminate your covers is better for the end of life than laminating your covers. So come up with a design that works without lamination. Right? Where in the past it would have been a simple, straightforward economic choice, economic and performance, so certification and cost perhaps, to glue two things together, two materials, not necessarily foam, but two brackets. You might bond them together. Bonded junctions are hard to recycle. The recycler can't break them apart, doesn't know what to do with them. It's better to design something to be joined together with a fastener that can be separated so that the raw materials can be separated for recycling. It's better to label each element of your product with its raw material, so that when the recycler comes to recycle it it could be in 15 years time, I might well be dead. I'm certainly never going to meet the person doing the recycling. We need to provide down the age information to help end of life recycling. So don't make it hard by bonding things together you could otherwise screw together, and don't use and be clear about the materials you're using. And then you have other choices, don't you? And this is where Ben, can help here. Is that there's two And Ben, when I get this wrong, help me, pick me up. But there's basically two sort of chemistries in plastics that we use on planes: polycarbonate and PVC. Polycarbonate is made from oil that comes out of the ground. It's a hydrocarbon out of the ground, and PVC is made from ammonia and salt. It's not from an oil well under the North Sea or in Texas somewhere. So PVC-based plastics start off with a lower amount of carbon embedded in them, and moreover, I think this is what I'm right about this. They're more suited to recycling at end of life. But the seat manufacturer screws it up if he sticks two dissimilar bits of plastic together, or even if he bonds an aluminium bracket to it, someone's got to get it off. It's not very helpful.
Those materials have infinite life, and what's happening is we're taking away their next life cycle by adding something to them. Is what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. So the system integrator, the seat designer, has to be educated by the suppliers of the raw materials about what their characteristics are, how they can be recycled, and what not to do that corrupts them, that prevents them from being recycled, and how much carbon's in them. So if you choose PVC over polycarbonate to make your life vest box or whatever, you've made a choice as a designer to embed some carbon in that product, and you've made a choice about how it's going to be recycled, how recyclable it is later, which is the life cycle analysis that Nico's talking about. And that's why I say it's loads of small choices, because every time you pick up the pen to draw a shape or to define something, you've got to consider its performance, its cost. And performance, I mean old-fashioned performance, as in certification, strength, that kind of those kind of requirements. Its cost, which was the business requirement, and now a new business requirement, which is its life cycle analysis, and then goes further actually to aluminium is an endlessly recyclable raw material, great stuff, but where you buy it affects how much carbon's in it. So and it's affected in two ways. You can buy a billet of aluminium that's been smelted from a entirely renewable power source, perhaps from hydroelectricity in Norway, and the most carbon efficient aluminium will have 3 to 4 kilograms of carbon embedded in each kilo of aluminium. The worst stuff that comes from a wholly coal-fired electricity supply chain for the smelting can have 14 kilos. So the same material, bought in different ways in different places, has profoundly different amounts of embedded carbon. And then if you machine it somewhere a long, long way away, where their electricity supply for their big machining centers is coal, and you ship it all the way to you, perhaps on the other side of the world, you've taken that 14 kilos of carbon in the billet, you've added a ton of carbon through its transformation, and another ton of carbon in its shipping, and now the thing's got, 15, 20 kilos of carbon in each kilo of the finished part. Whereas if you bought it locally from a green, not necessarily locally, but you need to assess the amount of carbon involved in the raw material, the transformation, and then the shipping to you, which is part of the life cycle analysis, which goes on to include how you're going to reuse it, how you're going to recycle it. And it's the reason, it's simple, provided you've got all the data around you. It's just lots and lots and lots of it. And the complexity comes in from two places. One is there's loads and loads of decisions to make like that. And the second one is you don't have rock solid data on how much carbon's in it. You can weigh it. You can pick a bit of something up, my mouse, and I can weigh it very precisely know how heavy it is. Really hard to find out how much carbon's in it. And that's the problem. That's the system-wide, that's the system problem where, both Nico and Ben have suppliers who give them raw materials. They transform them and they ship them to me, and then I use them. And so they've got to tell me stuff, and your supplier's got to tell you stuff. And we've got to come up with the same measure. The same, because in all measurements, you make assumptions. Even when you measure the length of something, you're making an assumption. It's an approximate length, which we talk about tolerances. But we all make assumptions in measurements. and those assumptions need to be the same. One obvious assumption is how many grams of carbon are in 1 kilowatt hour of electricity. That really depends where you are in the world, at what time of day it is, and what the weather's like. So you have to have some kind of assumption. And it needs to be the same for Nico and me and Ben. Otherwise, the stuff I make, Sohab I can't give Sohab good information about the stuff that he's trying to recycle.
Very interesting. So we're talking about I think that the essence of that really seems to be about materiality, about knowing your materials better, right? And I think a lot of it that you've touched on comes down to kind of knowledge. So are you picking the right material in the first place, and then what do you do with it, and then how do you track it through? I mean, I think probably pushing this back to Ben and Nico. Ben, I mean, I know you've done a lot of work on tracking and tracing individual components within it, but I suppose kind of a two-pronged question to you both is, number one, how do we increase that knowledge base with our customers? What can we do proactively to it, and then how do we track and trace and sort of control those materials? So that, is there any way to have some kind of ledger of what's going in? Ben, maybe start with you, because I know that you've done a bit of work on that stuff in the past.
Yeah, and it's not a quick process, right? You have to implement it, and to what Chris said, is it has to be the core of your decision making. It can't be a quick fix. So you have to it has to come from leadership and be part of your company core DNA, if you will. But absolutely, and I think Nico can probably speak a little bit more too on life cycle analysis, because they're doing some interesting things. But really getting a life cycle analysis process in order, or some unit of measurement of your manufacturing process. And ultimately, it's so you can provide it up to the next stream, so they have a unit of measurement to make that choice, right? Chris's company needs data and needs options to be able to make those responsible choices, and we're all connected in that sense. Nico, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, so obviously life cycle analysis is a really key part of it, I think, and obviously there's still a lot of improvements to be done, because as Chris alluded to as well, one life cycle analysis from one company is not necessarily the same and has the same set of assumptions to another company. So that's a key part of it. But coming back to, if I take the consumer world, if you look at consumer products, more and more these days, that's becoming mandatory that your product will come with a life cycle analysis, a carbon footprint. And if you look at more forward-thinking consumer brands, you're starting slowly to see now what the actual carbon footprint of a given article which you buy in a shop embeds during their life. So we've recently worked with Coach on their sub-brand Coachtopia, which is fully designed for circularity, but also transparency. And if you look at those articles, they have a carbon footprint including all components within that. And yeah, there's a lot of work behind the scenes to get to that stage, including getting a set of assumptions which are consistent across the supply chain and everybody measuring in the same way. Yeah, absolutely.
So Nico, that's really interesting, actually. You made a really interesting analogy there with kind of other industries. So obviously in the food industry, we're very used to now, and it's very common, you see people go into the supermarket and you look at the back of the packet to check the protein content and the amount of carbs and stuff. Do you foresee there's a way that we can do that so that Chris is looking at the packet for for your materials or for the thermoplastics and going, all right, I can see how much carbon's here, and then Sohab is seeing it on the back end going, oh, I can see how much went into this product, and now I know what to do with it at the end of life. And do you think we can kind of coalesce towards a common a commonly acknowledged or agreeable format for that? I guess that's probably important, right?
Yeah, I think it is very important, and I can see that the industry is going into that direction, absolutely. But there's still a lot of hurdles to pass to get to like a common practice, which, like in the food industry, even in the food industry, there's debates about what's on the label, right, and the way you can manipulate the numbers and things like that. So it will be the same with this type of system. So there's still a lot of hurdles, I think, to overcome, but I'm convinced it has to go in that direction, because otherwise, how would you know you're moving towards your target of net zero, and you're moving the needle in the right direction? Without any of that insight and transparency, you will never be able to get to know that you're moving in the right direction.
Right. So Sahab, if you had all of this information, so let's assume now that our great ideas, someone's listening and has gone, yes, let's do it. And tomorrow you receive your next seat and you go, oh, right, okay, this is the carbon content. This is all. How does that change your business operation? Like, how does that move the needle for you? What do you do now that you've got all this data? How does that make your life different? Is it different in a good way or a bad way, or is it just in a different way?
I think it's really good because it helps us sell that product to the customer with all the sustainability and green benefits of that product. That's what a lot of customers are asking us at the moment. So we also, right now, we have a product called Sky Leather, which we're selling. So this material is made from 100% water-based polyurethane, and we have a full chemical composition list. And when you compare this list with some of the other synthetic materials on the market, it is free from all types of petrochemical. So it sends a message of eco-friendliness and sustainability as well. And it does have a manufacturing process which is carbon neutral, and it will be 100% carbon neutral going forward. So when we present materials like Sky Leather to the customer for the seat covers, for example, we provide all that data to them to help them make that decision. And with any waste, there's hardly any waste with this material, because it has 80 to 90% utilization. So we provide that report to the customers as well. And when we're making seat covers, we give a report on the wastage that happened during the manufacturing process, and we list all the details of our manufacturing process. Our manufacturing facility has solar panels as well, which we generate up to 70% of the electricity. So we provide all of that data to our customers, which help them, use that details for the message they can promote through their airline.
Right. So now we've got the data sorted, so we know what's going in, we know what's coming out. We've made some conscious choices about our material selections. What does that mean then? We've got to think about this downstream. What does that mean from the customer's perspective? Because ultimately, yes, we're doing this to, in inverted commas, save the planet and what have you. But what do you think the end customer, aka the passenger, what is their perception, of these efforts that we're making? Are we moving the needle in terms of brand consciousness? Are we moving the needle in terms of purchasing decision? When you look at a ticket, then, are you going to say, right, I want this seat over this seat because of all of the stuff we're talking about, for example? Can it move that needle?
I mean, it's definitely comes down to brand consciousness, because airlines can use that message to promote that they're working towards the sustainability efforts and lowering greenhouse gas emissions, and they can advertise, we're using this seat with this material. It saves, for example, 0.96 kilograms per seat, and that's 16,000 kilograms of fuel saving, and which amounts to 50,000 kilograms of carbon emissions. So these are the messages airlines are using to promote their new cabins, which they've selected. So we've got a launch customer which we're announcing at AIX, and we've done study on these numbers and provided this data. So this is the message they'll be using to promote their new cabins, which they've retrofitted across 10 of their aircraft.
Right. So when you so Chris, like when you get a new customer now coming to sort of evaluate new seats, how important is this sustainability option to them in their sort of like choice matrix as they're sending out RFPs and stuff? How relevant and how important is it, do you think?
Well, I mean, it's extremely relevant because in 2023, it's business as usual. It's not a marketing campaign. It's not a sort of a tick box exercise to try and comply with some procurement department requirements. It's certainly for us anyway. It's about the conviction that it's the right thing to do, not because it wins me customers, simply because it's the right thing to do. It's a moral, commercial, ethical, self-interested imperative because we all want to have a planet, right?
Yeah. So I think
it's fun because we all got into this game of creating products for people because we like to invent things,
right.
And it's whatever your role is, in the whole endeavor. But in this industry, we create products that allow passengers to have great experiences, and it's fun having a new set of design constraints because it forces you to think a bit harder instead of doing the same old thing again and again and again. And I think that the passenger isn't going to notice anything. By which I mean, we're not in any way going to diminish the passenger experience. It's going to get better and better. The history is showing passenger experience just continues to improve. And at no point are we going to introduce hair shirts and static electricity, horrible plasticky seat covers because they're more recyclable. That's never going to happen. We're going to maintain really high standards of passenger experience and do things better. But better now includes not chucking loads of external carbon out of your process. That's all it means. Passenger's going to see nothing in terms of, the cabin will be the same. It'll look the same and it'll look better each year. It's the same meaning. It's got better every year for the last 20 years. And so it will continue. But we'll have had a bit more fun on the way, provided we choose to have that fun. We can say, I can't do it because I can't. I have to laminate my dress covers.
So I'm interested. I'm interested in your perspective too, because you've built effectively now a new blue sky company, right? Mm-hmm. So to a degree, does that make it easier for you to say, hang on a minute, we're starting from scratch, and I've learned from my years of experience, I'm going to build it in blue sky without having to fix something. I don't have to bolt it on because maybe these challenges, like when you started Acro, 20 years ago, were these challenges as prevalent then? And does it?
I'm not that old. You started off with calling me a veteran, and now you're 20 years on that. I'm not that old, lad. I'm 15. Anyway, 15. Of course, call it 15. Okay. But yeah. Well, I mean, on the one hand, it's easier. On the other hand, it's harder because we're having to build all of our business systems from scratch anyway. All the ones that existing companies have that are mature, and they have to change them, and I'm having to build them from scratch in a different way. So it's either whether it's easier or not, I don't know. It's certainly what we're doing, So because it's a trivial example. It's not very aircraft interior. It's the point, but it's relevant, which is that the format of the management accounts at Unum have to include a carbon column, not just a dollar column.
Wow.
So that when you're thinking about what procurement decisions have gone on to outsource, to move the procurement of this product from this supplier to that supplier, what does that mean for carbon? Like good or bad? Are you able to get access to that aluminium with lower carbon in it? But it's further away and you're paying more shipping. And what's the balance? The life cycle analysis. What's the balance of that decision? And can you save $1 by doubling the amount of carbon in a component? And is that a good idea? And if you're purely focused on money, it's a brilliant idea. Or if you're purely focused on short-term profits, it's a really good idea. If you're taking a broader perspective on things, it's nothing. There's nothing for free. Not even a saving is for free. And we've just got to think about these things more differently. And that's why we're quite excited about it. I'm personally excited about it because it's fun. It's giving me different things to think about as a manager. Right. I also get excited as a product developer. You go and find out this new material that Nico or Ben's got, or even Soab's found, and go, fantastic. Or going back to the suppliers, the supply chain, with your problems, because my problems, I've got a shorthand. My problems are the 4 C's, and the 4 C's for me are cushions, composites, carpets, and covers, because none of them can be recycled at the moment, and they're all petrochemical based. And carpets can't be recycled because they've got lots of dissimilar materials and they're all bonded together. Composites are again bonded together. Covers, I think we can sort out covers, and someone's doing cushions somewhere, but there's a flammability constraint, as there always is. But I want the 4 C's solved. So it's good fun walking around Hamburg, in a couple of weeks' time with my 4 C's, saying, has anyone got a solution to the 4 C's, so I can specify something that's going to give me a better outcome.
Wow, that's a really interesting way to tackle it, for sure. One of the things you touched on there that I think is really interesting is our sort of social responsibility within a corporate environment, even, and what we're sort of seeing now. That topic of conversation seems to be happening all the time, and it seems like you guys have it. But I'm curious to know what everybody else thinks about that. Is this kind of element within, say, your board meeting agenda for ESG compliance, right? So environmental and social responsibility is becoming more and more important. And I mean, if you looked in a boardroom 10 years ago, everyone would go, ES what does that even mean, right? And now you've got people like PricewaterhouseCoopers that are offering consultancy courses on it, and are offering to come and sit on your board and advise on it and all kinds of stuff. I mean, how do like Nico, how do you deal with that at your company? Do you have a conscious effort for ESG compliance? Is that something that you guys think about? How do you consider that in the equation, and how does it kind of affect your business in that respect?
Absolutely, but maybe we stay far away from consultants as we can. I think they're just telling you what you know already, and charge you a ton of money for it. But definitely, obviously, the environmental part of it has been in the DNA from when our business was established, probably the same time ago when
15 years ago, Nico, that's right.
So I will say I stick to the 15 years as well, rather than the 20 years. So that's always been in the heart of everything we're doing. It's in the DNA of our company. The social element has come on top of that and is becoming more and more important. And so I've earlier mentioned the Repurpose for Purpose initiative from Southwest, which we've heavily contributed to it as well. And I think it's initiatives like that. We try to be pragmatic. We try to do good for the environment, and we are based the smaller surroundings of Peterborough, and trying to do the best to do the best there. And I definitely think that has changed, because as Chris alluded to as well, in the past it was all around profitability. How can I make money, and the rest is all baggage. It's definitely changing now, and you see those elements starting to add up pretty similar level these days.
Ben, what do you think about that? I mean, being part of a sort of Japanese mothership, my experience of working for a Japanese company is always that the Japanese are very, very considered, very thoughtful, conscientious sort of people. I can't imagine there's no thought given to ESG at Sekisui, for example.
It is very big in the Japanese culture, just responsibility and community in itself, right? So ESG, we have not had to hire any consultants. It's been a part of our business for a very long time. And really, I think the challenge that the industry is going through is a lot of people that you've seen, like we said, in the last 10 years, what I've kind of coined is reactive sustainability versus proactive sustainability, right? Everybody's trying to find bolt-on, and if I just do this, right? It really comes down to getting that ESG mindset throughout your organization, down to the operators on the floor. We have within our organization, it's known that if something happens, if a spill happens, or if this happens, that there's action immediately taking place because it's built into the culture. And that takes time. That won't come from a consultant. That has to be from the leadership of the organization. And as Chris and Nico, it goes down to the basic decision making. So I think ESG is definitely important and is here to stay, but it can't be reactive. It's got to be built down into the foundation.
It's got to come from the heart, right?
From the heart. Yep.
From the heart. I love it, love it. So you touched on a really interesting point there. Maybe Sahab can give us some input here about what do we think about obviously there's always a bit of a crossover where you see could be materials or what have you putting in something into their product to make it environmentally friendly. So there's a big difference between building something blue sky and just kind of putting a sprinkling of something on to, you know, tick a box and greenwash it. I mean, that's got to be something that we've got to be sort of careful of. How do you think we prevent that, Sahab, in our industry? I mean, looking at materials, is that something that you guys keep an eye on to make sure that, you know, you're picking products for the right genuine reason as opposed to, you know, does it tick the proverbial box? And how do we prevent against that from being the case?
Hi, yeah. So, I mean, when we're selecting a product and presenting it to customers, we're actually sharing all the data regarding the manufacturing process of the product and the actual product itself as well. So we share all of that data. ESG is the main focus of AGW as well. So we've signed a United Nations pledge on sustainability. We have a sustainable manager joining the company as well, which will take lead on such items, especially when it comes to cabin interiors. We're asking our suppliers for their manufacturing processes, which we're presenting. To make sure that they're not just greenwashing, there's actually a sustainable way of manufacturing and sustainable way of disposing the waste as well.
Right. So that you touched on a really interesting point there about you talking about United Nations. That's really cool. But for everyone that has a United Nations thing, someone else has a Green Cabin Alliance or some other cabin alliance. Do you think we need to kind of have a co-joined kind of framework? Like talking about what Nico was talking about earlier. Do we all need to be doing the same color cabin alliance as opposed to different flavors? How do we do that?
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, there's so many different, like Green Cabin Alliance and United Nations Sustainability Pledge. I think there needs to be like a central organization where aerospace manufacturers should be part of and discuss the challenges openly on the materials, on the manufacturing process, and the sustainability aspect of these items we're manufacturing.
Right.
The thing is, though, there's nothing special about aviation. I think this is where Nico was saying we can learn from other industries. I think we should stop seeing ourselves as other or a special case, because at some point in the supply chain, you're just buying commercial products. You know, even Boeing and Airbus are just buying big billets of aluminium, and then they're converting them into airplanes or carbon fiber or whatever. So at some point you reach out into the real world, the non-aviation world, and you need to have, in order to produce an accurate and comprehensive analysis of the carbon in the service or product you're delivering to your customer, you need to be able to know what your supplier, you need to have the same basis of accounting as your suppliers have got. So we just need to join in with the world and get on with producing life cycle analyses. There's nothing special about aviation in this regard, I think. It's just how much carbon are you producing in your operation, whatever your operation is. Because, you know,
what do you think? What do you think about
Nico's
the
operation is
framework?
fundamentally different from mine, and we're both a world apart from what the airlines do in terms of actual physical operations. So we might as well be in different industries. I mean, Nico is in different industries. You're supplying aerospace, but not only, right?
Correct.
So
yeah, and I look a lot at the automotive industry, because I think there's a lot of learning, for instance, the aviation industry can take from there as well. I think I'm thinking about the future in aircraft as well. I would see a lot of stuff coming from automotive at some stage getting into aviation.
Yeah.
I
bet you're right. As a community,
yeah.
So then, though, do we risk following the automotive industry as opposed to the aviation industry? And like Chris was saying, do we need to? What does that look like in terms of where is the future direction? Is there some kind of new Paris Accord that everybody signs up to for everything? Or how do we make sure that we're all heading on more or less the same path and not diverging to that extent? Does that make sense?
I don't think that's the problem though. You know, because it's reduce the carbon in what you do today. That's all we've got to do, and tomorrow and the day after, the day after, the day after, right? And what does the carbon mean? We need to get some tools into people's hands so that they can. There's going to be something like, and there is something like an ISO 9001, or aviation's got AS 9100, isn't it?
Right.
There's an ISO standard on how to do carbon accounting. It's not very rigid. It's not very mature, but it's maturing. And then that's going to be great, because then you can require your suppliers to use it, or you can select your suppliers for the ones that are using it. And that ultimately, that's what's going to happen, is that passengers, the aviation industry at the airline level has got a big problem, because they are held up as the #1 polluter, producing as much carbon as a whole country and all this sort of stuff. And then there's a bit of it, certainly in the southeast of England, there's a bit of pressure around dinner party tables not to fly too much, although everyone does. But the polite thing to do is, be like smoking. 15 years ago, everyone said they didn't smoke, and a lot of people did. Quite a lot fewer people now do smoke, but we used to flip about it. I mean, the same thing happens about, there's a guilt about carbon, appropriately so. That pressure turns into pressure from the airline's PR department, which turns into pressure from the airline's procurement department, which turns into pressure on me, which turns into pressure on Nico. And the case for doing something is well made, isn't it? It's the specifics of the information flow and measurement, really. Although we have slagged off management consultants here, but actually it's their part of the world where things have got to change. We need new constructions for managing information within organizations. I'm not recommending Ernst & Young or any other consultancy, but the point I'm making is we've got to re-engineer our business processes so that our products are better, rather than trying to re-engineer our products. That will come once we re-engineer the business.
I have some feedback on your question. Being one of the founding members of Green Cabin Alliance, that's come up a lot, and a lot of conversations with you, Chris, in terms of what is regulation going to look like, and why do we have all these different bodies? And I think the key there is that everybody's hung up on waiting for regulation, and that's not the way it's done in other industries. And I look at this like a new frontier, right? You can either pioneer it and kind of help, drive that change, or you can wait until the city is built and the electricity infrastructure is done, and then you can come in and purchase a house, right? I think what needs to happen is we need more pioneers to lead the way, because those regulations typically form over time by example and by things being done and having opportunities to use those as regulations. So I say that, and I don't want everybody to get so hung up on waiting for regulation rather than pioneering what the future can be.
Right. So Ben, right, one thing that you could change to make that difference, what would it be, looking at your crystal ball?
More partnerships to address the actual issue rather than trying to find band-aid solutions.
Interesting. Nico, same question.
I think I will come back to my life cycle analysis, and rather than reinvent the wheel, just utilize the tools which are around us and drive them through the industry.
Interesting. And so what if you were gazing in your crystal ball, what would be your one magic solution if you could dip into the wizard's bag for a day?
I mean, it'd be pretty much same as what Nico said, that the life cycle solutions would be key. That information would be really helpful, when we're discussing projects with the customer. To provide that information would be the one.
Wonderful. Well, everybody, thank you so much for your really genuinely interesting inputs. We've just about reached time for this morning or this afternoon, depending on which part of the world that you are in. Yes, in my case, I'm not sure if you can hear it, but there are literally birds tweeting as they're all waking up. So It's all fun. But yeah, no, thank you very much for all your contributions. I think it's going to be a very, like Chris has said, it's going to be a very, very interesting AIX. I think certainly from our perspective, we have quite a few airline meetings where people are coming to see us because of the new sustainability aspect of our products that are launching. And time and time again, you always get the same people, right? I mean, being Ben working in the US, we know it all the time. There's a certain guy in Texas that always goes, yeah, I'll try to see you, but I'm kind of busy. And all of a sudden we start changing and talking about more of a sustainable future, and he's like, I'll be there. What time can I see you? And it's amazing. We finally kind of piqued people's interest. So very, very interesting changes, and happening very, very quickly as well. Can't believe the pace of the change that's happening. It's good. It's got to be a good thing.
Right.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Libby.
Thank you.
Yes, Matthew.
Everybody.
We'll be in touch with some copy and things that we wanted to sign off and just to show you. And otherwise, we'll see you at the show.
All right.
See everybody later.
Thank you.
Very well done, Mr.
Cheers,
Nichols.
everybody.
Got a future in this.
Bye.
Yes. Cheers, mate. Bye.
All right.
See you all. Bye.